The blinking cursor on my laptop had become my only company sometime after midnight. I leaned back, rubbed both hands across my face, then hit save again out of pure habit. I couldn't remember if it was the 10th time or the 100th. Either way, losing 6 hours of work wasn't a risk I could afford. The legal document covering my screen wasn't even written in English when I'd opened it that afternoon. It had arrived in Italian, packed with clauses, international regulations, and language so painfully formal that every sentence felt like untangling barbed wire. My job was to make it sound just as complicated, but in flawless legal English. By hour 5, every paragraph looked identical. By hour 6, I wasn't sure I even remembered what normal conversation sounded like anymore. Freelancing wasn't glamorous. People imagined flexible hours and working from home. They never pictured choosing between paying rent or replacing a dying laptop. Mine sounded like it was preparing for its own funeral every time the cooling fan started spinning. I finally closed the document and stretched my sore shoulders. That's when I noticed my phone. No notifications, no missed calls, nothing. A knot tightened somewhere deep inside my chest. Chloe should have been home. I picked up the phone and checked the time. 10:22 p.m. Her tutoring session at the public library always ended at 9. Even if the subway was running late, which lately seemed almost guaranteed, she would have walked through our apartment door at least 30 minutes ago. I called, straight to voicemail. "It's Dad," I said after the beep, trying to keep my voice steady. "Call me the second you get this, okay? You're starting to scare me." Silence answered. I ended the call, immediately dialed again, and got the exact same result. Dead battery. That was the logical explanation, except logic had a funny way of disappearing the moment you became a parent. People say fathers worry less. Those people have never spent 15 years raising a daughter alone. They've never learned that sometimes your instincts begin screaming long before your brain finds a reason. I stood up and started pacing our apartment. Calling it an apartment was generous. The living room bled directly into a tiny kitchen where the stove barely fit beside the sink. The wallpaper peeled near the ceiling, exposing water stains left by leaks our landlord kept promising to fix. Upstairs, another argument exploded through the floorboards. A woman yelled. Something heavy slammed against a wall. Then footsteps. Same soundtrack. Different night. When Chloe and I moved here after my divorce, I promised her it would only be temporary, just until I got back on my feet, just until more translation clients came in, just until life settled down. 2 years later, temporary had quietly become permanent. Emma, my ex-wife, hadn't just walked away from our marriage. She'd disappeared with nearly everything we'd saved, leaving me with debt, a broken apartment lease, and a terrified 13-year-old who pretended she wasn't scared because she thought I already had enough to carry. I caught my reflection in the dark window. 35, dark circles under my eyes, hair overdue for a cut, a face that looked older every month. Stress has a way of stealing years from you without asking permission. I looked back at my phone, still nothing. 10:35. That was enough. I grabbed my coat. Calling it a winter coat was almost insulting. The fabric had gotten so thin that cold air slipped straight through it, but replacing it wasn't exactly sitting high on my budget. Outside, November greeted me like an enemy. The cold bit through my clothes immediately. Queens never truly slept. Music drifted from bars. Traffic hummed somewhere in the distance. Sirens echoed across neighborhoods that had long stopped reacting to them. Yet somehow the sidewalk still felt empty. Too empty. I shoved my hands into my pockets and headed toward the subway station Chloe always used. Every stranger's face made me look twice. Every passing train sounded louder than usual. Every minute stretched longer. A group of men stood outside a convenience store, smoking beneath the awning. Their conversation stopped as I approached. I kept walking. Don't make eye contact, don't look nervous. Confidence, even fake confidence, was sometimes enough to keep people from bothering you. They watched me pass. Nobody said a word. The subway entrance looked abandoned. A station employee barely glanced up from his newspaper as I searched the platform with my eyes. No Chloe. I called again. Voicemail. "Come on, kiddo," I whispered after hanging up. My pulse wouldn't slow down. I left the station and started toward the library. Maybe she'd stayed late. Maybe she'd lost track of time studying. Maybe she'd found a friend. Maybe... Parents become experts at inventing comforting lies. Thunder rolled across the sky before I reached the next intersection. I looked up just as heavy clouds swallowed the moon. Seconds later, rain crashed onto the streets. Not a drizzle, not a shower, a wall of water. Within moments, I was soaked. Cold water dripped from my sleeves as I kept moving. The library had already closed, I knew that. Still, Hope has never cared much about facts. Maybe she'd taken shelter somewhere nearby. Maybe she was waiting for the storm to pass. Maybe she'd forgotten her phone charger. Anything. Anything except the thought my mind kept trying to drag me toward. The streets emptied almost instantly. People hurried indoors. Storefront lights clicked off one after another. I passed a 24-hour laundromat, glowing beneath harsh fluorescent lights. Several customers sat inside watching washing machines spin in hypnotic circles. None of them were Chloe. A pizza shop next door was locking up. The owner struggled with the metal security gate, while rain bounced off the sidewalk around him. I almost stopped to ask if he'd seen a teenage girl wearing a blue backpack. Instead, my phone vibrated. Hope exploded through me so violently, I nearly dropped it. Unknown number. I answered before the first ring finished. Chloe? Static, nothing else. Then the line disconnected. I stared at the screen, called back. No answer. Wrong number. Spam. Network failure. I didn't care which. My heart refused to believe any of those explanations. By then I'd wandered 6 blocks farther than I usually dared after dark. This section of Queens always felt forgotten. Streetlights flickered instead of shining. Most buildings looked abandoned even when they weren't. Ahead, beyond a chain-link fence, sat a small neighborhood park. Its covered pavilion stood empty beneath the pounding rain. Or at least, from where I was standing, it looked empty. Maybe Chloe had ducked into the park to escape the storm. That single thought was enough to pull me through the rusted gate. The rain had turned the walking paths into shallow streams, and every step splashed icy water over my shoes. Compared to the streets outside, the park felt abandoned, almost swallowed by the darkness. Only a handful of aging lampposts still worked, casting weak yellow circles across the soaked pavement. The pavilion stood in the middle of the park, its roof barely visible through the curtain of rain. I spotted someone sitting beneath it. For one impossible second, hope exploded inside me. Chloe! The figure didn't move. As I got closer, reality hit just as fast. Too tall, too broad. The shoulders alone told me it couldn't be my daughter. I slowed, disappointed, already turning away to keep searching somewhere else. Then I heard it. Footsteps, fast, desperate. Water splashing violently behind me, a terrified voice ripped through the storm. Please, somebody help me. I spun around. There she was, Chloe. Her clothes clung to her body from the rain, her hair plastered across her face as she sprinted toward the pavilion with everything she had left. I've never experienced relief and terror at the exact same moment until then. She was alive. She was right there. But she wasn't running toward me. She hadn't even seen me. Her eyes were locked on the stranger beneath the pavilion. Behind her, maybe 20 feet away, another man emerged from the darkness. A hood covered most of his face, but I didn't need to see his expression to recognize intent. He wasn't chasing. He was hunting. Chloe! I shouted with every ounce of strength I had. The thunder swallowed my voice. She never looked back. She stumbled onto the pavilion steps and nearly collapsed beside the stranger. Please, she gasped between sobs. Please don't let him take me. Her words froze my blood. He's been following me since the subway. He tried to grab me. I didn't think anymore. My body simply reacted. I ran. Every instinct I possessed narrowed into one impossible objective: reach my daughter. Nothing else mattered. The hooded man reached the pavilion seconds later. Under the dim overhead light, he looked even larger than he'd appeared from a distance. His posture radiated confidence, the kind built on believing nobody would stop him. The stranger who'd been sitting quietly finally stood. Even through my panic, I noticed details that didn't belong in a neighborhood like this. His tailored clothes, the expensive leather shoes somehow untouched by mud, the calm. Most people would have panicked. He looked inconvenienced, nothing more. He stepped between Chloe and the approaching man with effortless precision. Without raising his voice, he spoke. "Stay behind me." There was something unusual about his accent. Not thick, not obvious. European, Italian maybe. The hooded man sneered. "Move." His voice came out rough and impatient. "The girl comes with me." The stranger didn't even glance back at Chloe. "No." Just one word. Quiet. Certain. It carried more authority than shouting ever could. The attacker laughed. "I don't want trouble." He took another step. "So hand her over." His hand disappeared beneath his sweatshirt. When it came back out, steel caught the light. A knife. My stomach dropped. I was still too far away, close enough to watch, too far to help. Time broke apart. The man lunged. The stranger moved. I still can't explain what I saw. One instant the blade was aimed forward. The next, the stranger had somehow closed the distance before the attacker finished his first step. His hand locked around the man's wrist. A sharp crack echoed beneath the roof. The scream that followed barely sounded human. The knife clattered across the concrete. Before it could slide to a stop, 2 more men appeared from opposite sides of the pavilion. I hadn't seen them. I would have sworn the park was empty. Both wore dark suits despite the storm, and they moved with the same disciplined precision as the stranger. Within seconds, they had the attacker pinned. He struggled. He cursed. It accomplished nothing. The stranger adjusted one cuff as though he'd merely finished a business meeting. "Take him," he said evenly. One of the suited men nodded. The attacker suddenly sounded much less dangerous. "Please, I didn't do anything." The stranger looked at him with complete indifference. "You terrorized a child." His voice turned colder than the rain. "You'll answer for that." The 2 men dragged the screaming attacker into the darkness beyond the pavilion. Within moments, they were gone. Only the rain remained. I finally reached Chloe. She turned, saw me, and completely fell apart. "Dad!" She threw herself into my arms so hard we nearly lost our balance. Her entire body shook. Not from the cold, from shock. "I'm sorry," she cried into my shoulder. "My phone died, and then that guy started following me. I didn't know what to do." "You don't have to explain anything." I wrapped both arms around her as tightly as I could. "I've got you." She kept crying. I let her. Sometimes tears are proof that someone survived what could have broken them. I looked over her shoulder toward the man who'd saved her. Up close, he was even more striking. Dark hair, carefully styled despite the weather. Sharp features. A face that probably intimidated people even when he smiled. His eyes rested on us for a long moment. Not cold, not warm, simply observant, as though he never missed anything. I cleared my throat. "Thank you." The words felt ridiculously small. "You saved my daughter." He inclined his head once. "I arrived before something irreversible happened." That answer unsettled me more than it should have. He reached inside his jacket and somehow produced a perfectly clean handkerchief. He offered it to Chloe. "For your face." She hesitated before accepting it. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I just ran to whoever I saw first." "You made the correct decision." His reply came without hesitation. He turned his attention to me. "Do you live nearby?" Every warning I'd ever taught Chloe about strangers echoed inside my own head. Don't tell people where you live. Don't trust appearances. Don't follow anyone. But those rules became complicated when the stranger had just protected your child. "We're about 5 blocks south," I admitted carefully. "Near Jefferson." He nodded once. "I'll walk you home." "You've already done more than enough," I replied. "We don't want to keep you—" He interrupted by removing his long black overcoat. The fabric looked impossibly expensive. He placed it gently over Chloe's shoulders before she could protest. "It's no inconvenience." His eyes met mine again. There was something impossible to define behind them. Not kindness, not menace. Something quieter, something controlled. And for reasons I couldn't explain. That unsettled me far more than the knife ever had. "I insist." There wasn't an ounce of arrogance in Gabriel's voice. It wasn't a request either. It was simply the kind of statement people obeyed without realizing they were doing it. Chloe pulled his overcoat tighter around herself. The warmth seemed to break whatever composure she'd been clinging to, and fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. I couldn't blame her. The adrenaline was wearing off. Reality was finally catching up. I looked at Gabriel again, searching for words that didn't exist. Thank you felt embarrassingly small. How do you thank someone for stopping the worst day of your life from becoming your last good memory? You don't owe me gratitude, he said quietly, as if he'd read the thought before I spoke it. I'm still grateful. He gave the slightest nod, accepting that without arguing. We started walking. Chloe stayed pressed against my side while I kept one arm around her shoulders. Every few steps I glanced at her, just to reassure myself she was really there, alive, breathing. The rain had softened into a steady drizzle, leaving the streets glossy beneath the streetlights. For several minutes, none of us spoke. The only sounds came from our footsteps and the distant rumble of traffic. Finally, Gabriel broke the silence. What is your name? He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Chloe. She cleared her throat. I'm Chloe. A small pause. Chloe Turner. It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Turner. His tone remained remarkably calm, considering everything that had happened. My name is Gabriel Marino. Then his attention shifted toward me. And you're... Daniel Turner. I extended my hand almost automatically. He shook it once. His grip was firm but measured. Not an attempt to dominate, just enough pressure to remind me he was considerably stronger than he looked. I studied him as we walked. Everything about him refused to fit together. The expensive, tailored clothes, the immaculate posture, the way violence seemed almost routine to him. And then those men. Where had they come from? Why had they obeyed him instantly? None of it matched the image of an ordinary businessman taking shelter from the rain. I don't know how I'll ever repay you, I admitted. You already have. I frowned. I have. You still have your son. The words hit harder than he probably intended. I looked down at Chloe. She hadn't let go of my arm once. Gabriel glanced toward her. Were you studying this late because of school? She nodded. I've been falling behind in algebra. Her voice remained shaky. The library offers free tutoring every Thursday night. My phone battery died while I was there. She swallowed. I lost track of time. Gabriel listened without interrupting. You came out at the wrong subway stop? She nodded again. I wasn't paying attention. The moment I got outside, she hesitated. He was already watching me. I felt her fingers tighten around my sleeve. I thought I was imagining it. She looked at the sidewalk instead of us. Then he kept getting closer. I walked faster. He walked faster. I crossed the street. So did he. Her breathing became uneven. When he grabbed my arm, she stopped talking altogether. I squeezed her shoulder. You don't have to relive it. Gabriel spoke before she could apologize. You made every correct decision. She looked up at him. You ran. You searched for other people. You never stopped moving. His expression softened just enough to be noticeable. That probably saved your life. None of us spoke after that. His words hung in the cold air. Probably. Not definitely. Probably. Somehow that made it worse. We turned onto my block. The building came into view. Even after living there for years, I still hated seeing it through someone else's eyes. Cracked brick walls, graffiti sprayed across the entrance, one upstairs window covered with plywood after being broken months ago. The landlord never bothered replacing it. Gabriel examined the building without saying a word. He noticed everything. That much had become obvious. I suddenly became painfully aware of how different our worlds must have been. Mine smelled like leaking pipes and overdue bills. His smelled like expensive cologne and certainty. We climbed the front steps. I searched my pockets for my keys. Beside me, Chloe looked almost swallowed by Gabriel's overcoat. The sleeves covered her hands completely. She looked like a kid again, not the frightened teenager who'd been running for her life 15 minutes earlier. I unlocked the front door. This is us. Gabriel nodded once. I turned toward him. I mean it. Thank you. I'll never forget what you did tonight. Without answering, he reached inside his jacket. For a split second, my body tensed. Old instincts. Then he withdrew a small white card, completely blank, except for a phone number embossed across the center. No company logo, no address, no title, just 10 digits. He handed it to me. If anything happens, his eyes held mine. Call. I turned the card over. Nothing. Who exactly am I calling? A faint smile touched one corner of his mouth. If you need help, you'll reach the right person. That explained absolutely nothing. I looked back at him. Before I could ask another question, Chloe started removing his overcoat. Oh, I'm sorry. She held it out with both hands. I almost forgot. Keep it. She blinked. What? You'll need it more than I will tonight. I can't. It's worth... She looked down at the fabric. A lot. So? We couldn't possibly... You could. His voice remained calm. The discussion is over. For the first time all evening, Chloe actually smiled. A tiny one, barely visible. But it was there. She nodded. Thank you. Gabriel looked at me one last time. Lock your door. I will. Check the windows. I always do. His gaze briefly traveled across the street. This neighborhood attracts people who mistake vulnerability for opportunity. I knew exactly what he meant. I'll be careful. You should. Another nod. Then he turned and walked back into the rain. No dramatic farewell. No promise we'd meet again. Within seconds, his silhouette disappeared beyond the falling mist, swallowed by the darkness as quietly as he'd entered our lives. I stood there watching the empty street long after he was gone. My hands had started shaking again. Dad? Chloe's voice pulled me back. I looked at her. Come on. I forced a smile. Let's get you warm. Inside, the apartment somehow felt even smaller than before. Maybe because after standing beside someone like Gabriel Marino, every crack in the walls seemed impossible to ignore. I found dry clothes while Chloe disappeared into the bathroom. By the time she returned, I'd already made hot tea and wrapped 2 blankets around the old couch. She curled into one corner, still wearing Gabriel's oversized coat over her sweatshirt. It looked absurd on her. She refused to take it off. I'm sorry, she whispered. Again. I should have charged my phone. I should have paid more attention. I should have... No. I sat beside her. I pulled her into my arms. You are not responsible for what happened. She buried her face against my shoulder. But if I'd gotten off at the right station... I kissed the top of her head. Then he would have chosen someone else. She looked up. The realization slowly crossed her face. I nodded. The only person responsible tonight is the man who decided to hunt an innocent kid. Silence settled over the room. The rain tapped softly against the windows. Upstairs, our neighbors had started arguing again. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds, the kind that suddenly felt comforting. After several minutes, Chloe finally spoke. Dad, who do you think he really was? I didn't have to ask who. Gabriel. I stared at the plain white card resting on our coffee table. No name, no business, just a number. I honestly don't know. He scared me. She hesitated. But somehow, I never thought he'd let anything happen to us. I looked at the card again, neither did I. Normal men don't disarm someone with a knife in seconds. Normal men don't have silent bodyguards waiting in the shadows. Normal men don't hand out anonymous phone numbers after disappearing into the night. I should have been worried, maybe even afraid. Instead, the image I couldn't stop replaying wasn't Gabriel fighting. It was the instant Chloe reached him. The terror in her eyes had vanished the moment he stepped between her and the danger. Some people make promises with words. Gabriel Marino had made one simply by standing there. And somehow, every person beneath that pavilion had believed it. The only thing that mattered to me was that Chloe had made it home alive. Everything else, Gabriel Marino's identity, the expensive coat draped over the chair, the strange men who had obeyed him without hesitation, could wait. I slipped the plain white card into my wallet, tucking it behind my driver's license. I told myself it was only a precaution, nothing more than that. A number to keep in case life decided to become cruel again. I had no idea how soon that excuse would be tested. Morning arrived without warmth. Grey sunlight leaked through the rain-speckled windows, making our tiny apartment feel even smaller. November always had a way of stealing color from everything, but that day it felt as though it had stolen sound too. I barely remembered sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Chloe running through the rain toward a man she had never met, desperate enough to trust a stranger, because the stranger behind her was even worse. I jolted awake over and over, convinced I'd heard her screaming. Each time, she was still there, curled beneath a blanket in the corner of our shared apartment. Safe. Gabriel's coat rested over the back of a chair, like silent proof that the nightmare had actually happened. I made coffee, the cheap instant kind that tasted more like chemicals than beans, but I wasn't drinking it for pleasure. I just needed something to convince my brain to keep functioning. My laptop was still open on the kitchen counter. The translation I'd abandoned the previous night waited on the screen exactly where I'd left it. I finally submitted it just after dawn, with an apology explaining there had been a family emergency. For once, the client didn't complain. Around 9, Chloe wandered into the kitchen. She looked exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes, and she moved like every step required permission. She didn't say a word. She simply leaned against me. I wrapped my arms around her before she had the chance to ask. "I'm staying home with you today," I said quietly. She nodded against my shoulder. "I don't think I could sit in a classroom right now." "You don't have to." Neither of us mentioned the attack. We didn't have to. It occupied every inch of the room anyway. The hours crawled by. She sat with a blanket wrapped around herself while I pretended to work. Words filled my monitor, but none of them meant anything. I read the same paragraph 5 times without understanding a single sentence. Eventually, I gave up. Instead, I opened a browser. Gabriel Marino. The search results were almost disappointingly ordinary. Import businesses, real estate investments, photographs from charity galas where he stood in tailored suits beside politicians and wealthy donors, smiling the kind of practiced smile successful men wear for cameras. Nothing about broken wrists. Nothing about men materializing from the darkness at a single command. Nothing about the icy calm I'd witnessed when he'd looked at the man chasing Chloe. The internet described a respectable businessman. My memory described someone entirely different. "What are you looking at?" I hadn't heard Chloe walk up behind me. I closed one of the tabs. "The man who helped us." She stared at the screen for a moment. He scared me. I looked back at her. But not in the same way. I know. He was dangerous. I know. But somehow, she searched for the words. I felt safer the second he showed up. That sentence stayed with me, because it was exactly how I'd felt too. I shut the laptop. "How are you holding up?" She hugged herself. "I keep replaying it. The man following me. The things he was saying." Her voice became almost a whisper. "If Gabriel hadn't been there..." I reached for her hand before she could finish. "I don't. But what if..." "No." I squeezed her fingers. "You got away. That's the only ending that matters." She nodded, although I could tell she didn't believe it yet. After several quiet minutes, she asked, "Should we report it?" I've been asking myself the same thing. What would we even tell them? That someone followed you? That another stranger stopped him? We don't know either man's full story. And the only person we know by name is the one who saved you. I wasn't willing to drag Gabriel into questions he hadn't earned, not after what he'd done. "If something else happens," I finally said, "we'll go. For now, we breathe." That became our entire day. I cooked lunch. Neither of us touched much of it. She opened her homework, stared at it for 10 minutes, then quietly closed the notebook again. I reorganized kitchen cabinets that didn't need organizing, simply because my hands couldn't tolerate being still. Every noise outside made me pause: car doors, footsteps, sirens, voices drifting through the hallway. Our apartment had never felt dangerous before. Now every shadow carried possibilities I couldn't control. Late that afternoon, Chloe finally fell asleep on the couch. Exhaustion had beaten fear, at least for a little while. I covered her with another blanket and stood by the living room window. People moved through the neighborhood as if nothing had changed. Parents carried groceries, children laughed, delivery trucks rolled past. The entire city continued without acknowledging that my universe had nearly collapsed less than 24 hours earlier. I reached into my wallet. The white card slid between my fingers. No logo, no address, no title, just a phone number. The anonymity almost said more than a business card ever could. Who carries a number with no name attached? Someone who expects to be recognized, or someone who prefers not to be? Either way, I couldn't throw it away, not after what he'd done. Saturday wasn't any easier. Neither of us slept much. Chloe woke twice from nightmares, and each time I found myself sitting beside her until she drifted off again. Morning arrived carrying the same silence. Breakfast sat untouched between us. Neither of us admitted we had no appetite. The apartment suddenly felt too cramped, the walls pressing inward with every passing hour. Finally, I pushed my chair back. I need groceries. It sounded ridiculous after everything we'd been through, but ordinary errands felt like an act of resistance. You want to come? She immediately shook her head. I don't think I'm ready. That's okay. I'll be back before you know it. I grabbed my jacket, my wallet, and the old reusable shopping bag stuffed inside the hallway closet. Before opening the door, I turned back toward her. Lock this behind me. I will. And don't open it for anyone. A tiny smile appeared, despite everything. Dad? I'm not 5. I know. I smiled back for the first time since the attack. Humor your paranoid father anyway. This time she laughed, only for a second. But after the longest 48 hours of my life, 1 second of hearing my daughter laugh felt priceless. I left the apartment because I needed to believe life could still be ordinary. Milk, bread, eggs. Simple things. If I could fill a grocery basket, maybe I could convince myself Thursday night had been an exception instead of the beginning of something worse. The neighborhood market was only a few blocks away. It charged ridiculous prices, but I didn't have the energy to take the subway across town just to save a few dollars. I wandered the aisles without really seeing them. Boxes found their way into my basket through muscle memory, while my mind replayed Chloe's terrified face over and over again. Every few seconds I heard her scream. Every few seconds I imagined arriving too late. By the time I reached the checkout line, my pulse still hadn't settled. Then the first shot echoed outside, a sharp crack, another, then 3 more in rapid succession. Nobody moved. For 1 strange second, every person inside that little store shared the same lie. Fireworks, construction, a car backfiring, anything except the obvious. Then someone screamed. Panic exploded. People dropped to the floor. The cashier disappeared beneath the register. Glass rattled somewhere near the entrance as more gunfire erupted outside. I hit the ground so hard my grocery basket tipped over, oranges rolling across the tile. Only one thought entered my head. Chloe. She was home alone. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my phone trying to unlock it. She answered before the first ring finished. Dad? Her voice was already trembling. I heard gunshots. I know. Something hit the building. Ice flooded my veins. Listen to me. I forced every word out as calmly as I could. Go into the bathroom. Lock the door. Stay low. Don't stand near any windows. What about you? I'm coming home. Hurry. I'm already on my way. The moment the call ended, I was moving. I left every grocery item behind. Nothing inside that store mattered anymore. I sprinted through the streets without caring whether whoever had been shooting was still nearby. My lungs burned. My legs begged me to slow down. I ignored both. Every terrible possibility my imagination could invent was waiting for me at the end of those blocks. When our building finally came into view, I searched desperately for signs of damage. Then I saw shattered glass sparkling on the sidewalk. A second-floor window had been blown apart. Not ours. Close enough to make my stomach twist anyway. I bounded up the stairs, fumbling with my keys. "Chloe! In here!" Her voice came from the bathroom. I threw the door open. She sat curled inside the bathtub, hugging her knees exactly the way I'd told her. Then I noticed the window. A perfect circular hole pierced the frosted glass. For one impossible second I couldn't breathe. A bullet. It had passed through our apartment. I crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her into my arms. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head against my chest. "It happened after I got in here." I stayed down. "You did exactly right." I held her tighter than I probably should have. Not because she needed it, because I did. Outside, sirens grew louder. The neighborhood filled with shouting, barking commands, crying children, slamming doors. Chaos had reached our street. I finally accepted something I'd been refusing to admit. I couldn't protect her by myself anymore. The card. I reached into my wallet. The plain white card seemed heavier than it had the day before. My thumb hovered over the number. Calling him meant stepping into a world I didn't understand. Not calling him meant pretending everything would somehow fix itself. I already knew which lie was more dangerous. I pressed call. He answered immediately. No greeting, no hesitation. "Gabriel, it's Daniel." There was only a brief pause. "I remember." His voice was steady enough to slow my breathing. "What happened?" "There was a shooting." "Our apartment." I looked toward the damaged bathroom window. A bullet came through. Neither of us was injured, but... My voice broke. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." "Are you both inside?" "Yes." "Stay there." Another pause. Then, with complete certainty, "I'm coming." The line disconnected. I stared at the phone for several seconds. I had just asked a man I barely knew for help. A man surrounded by questions I couldn't answer, yet somehow I felt safer than I had since Thursday night. "Is he coming?" Chloe asked quietly. I nodded. He said to stay put. So we waited. The apartment felt impossibly small. Voices echoed in the hallway. Neighbors argued. Someone nearby sobbed uncontrollably. Police sirens multiplied outside until they blended into one endless wail. Every minute stretched forever. I watched the clock. 5 minutes, 8, 10. 13 minutes after the call, someone knocked. 3 controlled knocks. Not loud, not impatient, certain. I looked through the peephole. Gabriel stood outside wearing a charcoal overcoat, his expression unreadable. 3 men flanked him, each one scanning the hallway instead of looking at the door. Professionals. The moment I unlocked it, Gabriel stepped inside. His eyes swept across the apartment in seconds. Nothing escaped his attention. The cracked ceiling, the narrow hallway, the frightened teenager standing behind me, the bathroom. "Show me." I led him without speaking. He examined the shattered window, crouching to study the bullet's path through the room. One of his men quietly spoke into an earpiece. Another inspected every window facing the street. The third walked the perimeter of the apartment as though mapping every possible vulnerability. Gabriel remained silent for almost a full minute. When he finally stood, something in his expression had changed. His calm hadn't disappeared. It had become colder. He turned toward us. "Sit down." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I guided Chloe to the worn-out couch while I sat beside her. Gabriel pulled one of our old folding chairs away from the kitchen table and positioned it directly across from us. He rested his forearms on his knees. For several long seconds, he simply looked at us. When he finally spoke again, his tone carried the weight of someone who had already reached a conclusion. This wasn't random. The room fell completely silent. The room had gone so quiet that I could hear the old pipes inside the walls groaning. 2 of Gabriel's men remained where they had stationed themselves the moment they entered. One by the front door, another watching through the cracked blinds. Neither spoke, neither relaxed. They looked like men who expected violence to return at any moment. Gabriel finally broke the silence. This wasn't some random shooting. His voice stayed calm, almost detached, which somehow made his words feel even heavier. It was planned. A local crew decided to challenge territory controlled by the Sinaloa cartel. They've been preparing for weeks. Tonight was simply the opening move. I stared at him. How could you possibly know that? The question escaped before I had time to reconsider it. He held my gaze without blinking. Because I know who owns every corner worth fighting over in this city. There wasn't arrogance in his tone, only certainty. And I know exactly when someone decides to test those boundaries. A knot formed in my stomach. So this isn't over. He slowly shook his head. No. He glanced toward the shattered window where fresh bullet holes decorated the frame. It will get much worse before it gets better. I felt Chloe's fingers wrap around my hand. They were cold. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I knew she was asking the same question running through my own mind. What are we supposed to do? Gabriel answered immediately. You leave. I let out a short laugh that held no humor. If only it were that simple. It can be. No, I rubbed my forehead. You don't understand. For the first time since he'd arrived, I spoke without trying to sound composed. I work 16-hour days translating documents online. Every month is a balancing act between rent, groceries, and utilities. If I'm lucky, I save a few $100s. I swallowed hard. My ex disappeared years ago. No child support. No family willing to help. There's nowhere else for us to go. The confession left me feeling exposed. Gabriel remained silent for several seconds before speaking. What if you didn't have to choose between safety and survival? I frowned. I'm listening. I own several properties in Manhattan. That surprised me. Most are commercial buildings, but some include residential apartments for employees and trusted associates. He leaned back slightly. I have a vacant 2-bedroom apartment in the West Village. I almost laughed. I can't afford a place like that. You won't be renting it. I narrowed my eyes. I don't accept charity. I'm not offering charity. His answer came without hesitation. I'm offering employment. He folded his hands together. My companies import Italian products, wine, olive oil, textiles, specialty foods. Every shipment involves contracts, customs paperwork, legal correspondence, supplier negotiations. He studied me carefully. I've been told you're fluent in Italian. I've worked as an Italian-English translator for years. Good, a small nod. Then you're qualified. I waited. My senior translator is retiring. I need someone to replace him. He named a monthly salary. The number almost made me think I'd heard him wrong. It matched what I currently earned, except I had to exhaust myself every single month just to reach it. And the apartment? I asked quietly. It comes with the position. My mind immediately searched for the catch. Nothing this generous ever arrived without one. So what's the part you're leaving out? A faint smile crossed his face. The apartment happens to be in the same building where I live. There it was. I occupy the penthouse. He didn't avoid the implication. I wanted you to know before you agreed. I crossed my arms. So you'd be keeping an eye on us. I'd be making sure you're alive. His correction came gently. Those are two different things. The sincerity in his voice made arguing surprisingly difficult. I'm not interested in controlling your life. His expression hardened. I'm interested in making sure neither you nor your daughter become casualties in someone else's war. I looked around our apartment. Water stains covered the ceiling. The smell of mold never completely disappeared, no matter how much we cleaned. The broken window still let in the cold night air. Then I looked at Chloe. The exhaustion beneath her eyes hurt more than anything Gabriel had said. She was too young to carry this much fear. Maybe my pride wasn't protecting her anymore. Maybe it was only trapping us here. When? The word barely came out. Monday morning. He stood. My staff will pack everything. You don't have to. It's already arranged. He buttoned his jacket. Employment contracts, housing documents, everything will be legal. He paused. This is a business agreement. Not a rescue, not charity, a transaction. Even so, one question still refused to leave my mind. Why us? He looked at Chloe before answering. The night everything happened, his voice became quieter. She ran toward me. I remembered. She hadn't known his name. She hadn't known who he was. She had simply seen someone she believed could protect her. A frightened child trusted me without asking questions. He met my eyes again. In my world, trust creates responsibility. I frowned. And what exactly is your world? A small smile appeared, but it carried no warmth. One you don't need to understand. He turned toward the exit. We'll be here Monday at 8. Something stopped me. Wait. He looked back. If I accept... I forced myself to keep speaking. The work stays legal. It will. If I see anything illegal, you walk away. No pressure? No pressure. And my daughter has nothing to do with your business. His answer came instantly. She never will. One final concern lingered. The apartment. I hesitated. I don't want there to be misunderstandings. His face became completely unreadable. You'll be my employee. Nothing more. You'll live in company housing. Nothing less. I have no interest in asking for anything beyond that. For reasons I couldn't explain, I believed him. Maybe because he had never tried to charm me. Maybe because he had answered every difficult question directly. Or maybe because the only thing he seemed determined to protect wasn't himself. It was Chloe. I took a slow breath. We'll be ready Monday. He nodded once before looking at her. I think you're going to like your new neighborhood. She blinked. There are parks. A tiny smile appeared on her face. And streets where children don't have to look over their shoulders. For the first time in what felt like years, Hope entered the room before Gabriel walked out of it. Thank you, Chloe whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but Gabriel heard it. He looked at her for a second, his expression softening just enough to be noticeable. You don't owe me thanks. He started toward the hallway before pausing with one hand resting on the doorframe. Pack the things that actually matter. His eyes drifted across the apartment. The furniture stays. Everything waiting for you is already furnished. Then he was gone. His security team disappeared with him, leaving behind nothing except silence. The apartment suddenly felt even smaller than before. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by cracked walls, broken glass, and the lingering smell of gunpowder, wondering whether I had just made the smartest decision of my life, or the worst. Chloe wrapped both arms around my waist. We're really leaving. I held her tighter than I had in years. Yeah. I kissed the top of her head. We're really leaving. Inside, though, another voice refused to stay quiet. Who exactly had I trusted, and why had trusting him felt easier than trusting anyone else? In that evening, neither of us watched television. Neither of us had much of an appetite. Instead, we opened closets that barely held anything and started sorting through the small collection of possessions we'd accumulated over 3 difficult years. It didn't take long. A handful of clothes, some worn paperbacks, family photographs I'd refused to throw away despite everything, school projects Chloe insisted on saving. That was our entire life. When we finished, 4 cardboard boxes and 2 suitcases sat near the front door. Chloe frowned. That's all we own? Her question landed harder than she intended. I forced a smile. I'd rather think of it this way. She looked at me. We're traveling light. She laughed quietly. I guess that's one way to see it. New city. I shrugged. New chapter. She nodded slowly. I hope this one's better. So do I. Sunday felt strangely unreal. I called the landlord first. He barely reacted when I explained we were leaving immediately. I offered to forfeit the security deposit. He accepted before I even finished the sentence. No questions, no arguments, no concern. Just another tenant moving out, just another apartment waiting for the next desperate family. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. After hanging up, I looked around the apartment one last time. It had never been home. It had simply been where survival happened. Later that afternoon, I found Gabriel's business card resting on the kitchen counter. I turned it over in my fingers several times. By tomorrow morning, Chloe and I would be living in the same building as a man I barely knew, a man surrounded by bodyguards, a man who somehow knew everything happening in the city, a man who insisted he only wanted us safe. Every rational part of me warned that people like him usually came with hidden costs, but every instinct I had as a father told me something else. He had protected Chloe before asking for anything in return. That mattered, maybe more than it should have. "Sam matter. Are you taking this?" Chloe walked into the room holding the expensive wool coat Gabriel had wrapped around her shoulders the night he'd found her terrified in the street. She had folded it carefully, almost respectfully. "Yes." I accepted it. "We'll return it." She looked unconvinced. "He saved me. I know. And now he's saving us." I shook my head gently. "He's giving us an opportunity." She smiled. "That's still saving us." I couldn't argue with that. The Monday couldn't arrive fast enough. At exactly 7:45 a.m., someone knocked. 3 movers stood outside wearing company shirts and friendly smiles. One carried a clipboard. Another handed me a cup of coffee from a cafe I could never have justified spending money on. "Good morning," one of them said cheerfully. "We'll take care of everything." They weren't exaggerating. Within minutes they were wrapping dishes, labeling boxes, protecting picture frames, treating every object we owned as though it actually mattered. No one had ever handled our belongings with that kind of care before. Watching strangers respect our life almost brought tears to my eyes. By 9:30 the apartment was empty. I didn't look back when we walked out. Some places deserve to be forgotten. Seostibitata, the drive into Manhattan, felt less like changing neighborhoods and more like crossing into another world. The streets gradually became cleaner, buildings stood taller, trees lined sidewalks instead of abandoned shopping carts. People actually smiled while walking their dogs. Chloe pressed her forehead against the car window. "It's beautiful." I realized I'd forgotten New York could look like this. The vehicle eventually stopped outside an elegant brick building tucked onto a quiet West Village corner. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. Everything about it suggested stability. A uniformed doorman greeted us before we even reached the entrance. "Welcome. Mr. Marino has been expecting you." Hearing our names spoken so naturally felt surreal. Inside, polished marble reflected sunlight pouring through oversized windows. The elevator moved silently. No rattling, no flickering lights, no graffiti carved into the walls, just smooth, effortless movement upward. 8th floor. The doors opened. One of the movers handed me a key. "Your apartment." My hands trembled slightly as I unlocked the door. The first thing that greeted me wasn't furniture. It was sunlight. Warm golden light spilled across hardwood floors through enormous windows. For a second I simply stood there. I'd forgotten what a bright home looked like. Chloe slipped past me. "Oh." The single word carried more emotion than an entire conversation. The living room felt open and peaceful, cream-colored walls, comfortable furniture, bookshelves waiting to be filled, a dining table where people could actually sit together. Outside the windows, leafy trees swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. I couldn't remember the last time I'd looked outside and seen green instead of concrete. Then I found the kitchen. Every appliance matched. Everything worked. The countertops were spotless, cabinets closed properly. The faucet turned on with strong, steady water instead of coughing, rusty streams. I laughed before realizing I was crying. The bathroom was just as unbelievable. No cracked mirror, no peeling paint, no mold creeping across the ceiling. I looked at my reflection and barely recognized the man staring back. He looked tired, but for the first time in years, he also looked hopeful. There were 2 bedrooms. Mine held a queen-sized bed, a desk facing the window, and enough closet space that my few shirts looked almost lonely hanging inside. Then Chloe opened her door. She froze. "This," she swallowed. "This is mine." I nodded. She walked slowly around the room, touching the bookshelf, the curtains, the neatly made bed. My own room. Her voice cracked. I've never had my own room. That sentence shattered whatever composure I still had. For 3 years we'd shared one tiny bedroom, because we had no other choice. Privacy had become something other families enjoyed, not us. She turned toward me with tears streaming down her face. I crossed the room and hugged her. Neither of us spoke. We simply stood there while the movers quietly carried in our boxes, pretending not to notice two people overwhelmed by something as ordinary and as extraordinary as finally having enough space to breathe. By noon, everything we owned had been unpacked. Our entire life barely filled one corner of the apartment, yet somehow, for the first time in years, it finally felt like we had room to build a future. The first thing I noticed was Chloe humming. It wasn't loud, just a quiet little tune drifting through the apartment while she folded clothes into drawers that, for the first time in years, actually belonged to us. She moved from room to room with an excitement I'd almost forgotten she was capable of feeling. Watching her made the place feel real. Until then, part of me had been convinced someone would knock on the door and tell us there had been some terrible misunderstanding, that this apartment belonged to someone else, that we'd have to pack everything back into boxes and disappear again. No one came. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, while I improvised lunch using groceries that had somehow already been stocked in the refrigerator. Fresh vegetables, bread that wasn't stale, butter, real coffee. I couldn't remember the last time opening a refrigerator didn't fill me with anxiety. We ate beside the window overlooking the street below. People hurried through their ordinary Saturday routines, completely unaware that my entire life had shifted overnight. "I think I like it here," Chloe whispered. I smiled. "So do I." I wasn't sure whether I believed it. Around 3 in the afternoon, someone knocked. 3 calm, measured taps. When I opened the door, Gabriel stood there dressed in a charcoal grey suit, a leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm. He looked exactly like someone who belonged in boardrooms instead of apartment hallways. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. Not at all. Suddenly I became painfully aware of my worn jeans, my old sweater, the fact that I hadn't even shaved properly that morning. He stepped inside without judgment, taking a slow look around the apartment. "It already feels lived in." "I hope that's okay. It means you're settling in." His answer eased something inside me. He placed the portfolio on the kitchen table and unclipped the brass latch. "I brought everything you'll need. Contracts, employment paperwork, lease agreements, official documents. Nothing about them felt rushed or improvised. Every page had been professionally prepared." Chloe leaned against the kitchen doorway, silently watching while Gabriel organized the papers into neat stacks. "This apartment," Gabriel explained, "is being assigned as corporate housing through Merino Imports. The administrative filing will take a few weeks, but legally you can consider this your residence starting today." Residence, such a simple word. Yet hearing it nearly broke me. He slid another document toward me. "Your employment agreement." I skimmed the first page. "Senior translator, Italian to English, commercial correspondence, international contracts." The salary listed made me blink. $3,000 every month, guaranteed. Remote work unless meetings required otherwise. Then I reached the benefits section. Health insurance, 90 days. I stared at those 2 words longer than anything else. I'd lived without insurance for so long that every headache, every fever, every accident had felt like a financial death sentence waiting to happen. Gabriel noticed. "That part surprised you." "I forgot what it feels like to have a future." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "My assistant Sophia will coordinate your assignments. She's organized, patient, and far less intimidating than I am." That earned the smallest smile from me. "I wasn't going to say you were intimidating, but you thought it." "Maybe." For the first time, I caught the hint of amusement in his eyes. He handed me Sophia's business card. "The work is legitimate," he continued more seriously. "Wine distributors, olive oil producers, import contracts. Nothing hidden, nothing illegal. I looked directly at him. And if something ever changes, you call me. No questions? I'll handle it. His confidence wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I rested both hands on the contract. I still have conditions. I expected you would. My daughter stays completely separate from anything outside the company. Gabriel turned toward Chloe. I agree. I mean completely. I understand exactly what you mean. His answer came without hesitation. No danger. No? No illegal activity? Never. I believed him. That realization scared me more than it should have. As I uncapped the pen, another question escaped before I could stop it. Why us? The room became quiet. Gabriel considered the answer carefully, instead of reaching for something rehearsed. Because your daughter trusted me. He glanced toward Chloe. When a child asks for help, she doesn't calculate risk. She simply believes someone will protect her. He looked back at me. I decided not to betray that belief. His voice remained calm. I have resources that cost me very little, but change everything for someone else. He paused. In my world, loyalty isn't something you talk about. It's something you prove. The silence stretched between us. Since Thursday night, he continued, I've considered the two of you my responsibility. There was nothing possessive about the way he said it, nothing controlling. It sounded more like an oath than a promise. I signed one page after another. When the final signature dried, Gabriel gathered the documents back into perfect order. Sophia will email your first assignment tomorrow morning. What should I expect? Probably something simple. We want you to ease into the workload. He closed the portfolio and stood. If anything in this apartment gives you trouble, there's a building superintendent. He hesitated. Or you can call me directly. I have your number. I know. Before leaving, he turned to Chloe. I've already started the transfer paperwork for the elementary school 3 blocks north. Her eyes widened. Really? You'll still need to finish enrollment in person, but the process has already begun. She looked at me with the kind of excitement children shouldn't have to earn. A new school, Gabriel nodded. A safer one. She whispered, Thank you. He inclined his head as though gratitude made him uncomfortable. You're welcome. Then he disappeared down the hallway. The apartment suddenly felt larger after he left, maybe quieter too. Jakizuki Diwasha Monday morning arrived with an email from Sophia precisely at 8 o'clock. Professional, friendly, efficient. Attached was a commercial agreement between Merino Imports and a family-owned winery in Tuscany, complete with terminology notes and formatting guidelines. Nothing suspicious, nothing complicated, exactly as Gabriel had promised. 4 hours later, I submitted the translation. Less than 30 minutes after that, Sophia replied. Excellent work. Payment scheduled for Friday. Short, encouraging. No unnecessary compliments, just respect. By Wednesday, Chloe and I visited her new school. Bright classrooms. Books that weren't falling apart. Teachers who actually smiled. Watching her walk those hallways, I realized she'd already started becoming a different kid. Thursday brought another assignment, this one involving a Sicilian olive oil supplier. Again, everything was legitimate. Again, Sophia anticipated every question before I could ask it. Working with her felt easy. I hadn't used that word to describe employment in years. Friday afternoon, Gabriel stopped by unexpectedly. I'm only here to make sure the apartment isn't giving you problems. The visit lasted maybe 5 minutes. Professional, brief. But while we talked, I noticed his eyes lingering on the living room. The blankets folded neatly over the couch. Chloe's books stacked beside the window. The framed drawing she'd taped to the wall. It looks like a home now, he said quietly. After he left, I couldn't stop thinking about those words. Home. Saturday morning he appeared again. This time he inspected the heating system. He tested every radiator personally, checked the water pressure and ran both bathroom faucets. I followed him through the apartment feeling oddly embarrassed. You don't have to pretend everything works perfectly, he said without looking up. I'm not pretending. You seem nervous. I've never had a landlord who cared whether the heat worked. He chuckled softly. I'm not interested in collecting complaints after winter arrives. It's perfect. He straightened. Good. At the door, he paused. How's Chloe adjusting? Nervous. About school? Mostly. But she's excited. A faint smile crossed his face. First day nerves usually disappear before lunch. I hope you're right. I usually am. He stepped into the hallway. As the elevator doors closed behind him, I leaned against the apartment door trying to convince myself that 2 visits in 1 week from a landlord were perfectly normal. Somehow. I didn't believe that for a second. By the end of the first week, I caught myself doing something I hadn't done in years, planning ahead, not just until tomorrow, not until the end of the month. I was actually thinking about what life might look like 6 months from now. That realization unsettled me more than any hardship ever had. The job was steady. The apartment no longer felt borrowed. Chloe laughed more than she cried. For someone who had spent years surviving one disaster at a time, stability almost felt suspicious. That Friday evening, I rode the elevator downstairs to check the mailbox. The lobby was nearly empty, washed in the warm glow of recessed lighting that made everything feel quieter than the city outside. As I sorted through envelopes, the front doors opened. Gabriel stepped inside carrying several grocery bags, not convenience store bags, heavy paper bags from an upscale specialty market. He noticed me immediately. I didn't expect to see you. I could say the same. He lifted one of the bags slightly. I was running errands. I laughed. I can see that. He glanced toward the mailbox in my hands. Nothing exciting? Mostly bills that somehow managed to find my new address. His smile was brief. They're persistent. They always are. For a moment we simply stood there. No business, no contracts, no maintenance inspections. Just 2 people unexpectedly sharing the same quiet evening. There's an Italian market a few blocks west, he said, shifting the weight of the bags. They import directly from Naples and Bologna. You actually shop there? When I can. I didn't picture you cooking. That made him chuckle. I take that personally. I meant, you always seem busy. I usually am. He shrugged. But my mother believed food deserved time. His expression changed as soon as he mentioned her. She grew up outside Naples. According to her, rushing a meal was practically a moral failure. I think I'd have liked her. I know you would have. His voice became softer. I still miss her every day. I hesitated. I'm sorry. 6 years. He nodded once. Cancer. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Grief has a way of recognizing itself. Finally he exhaled. She would have admired you. I frowned. You don't even know me. I know enough. His dark eyes met mine. You refuse to quit. I looked away first. No one had ever described me that way. Most people saw exhaustion. He somehow saw endurance. Trying to redirect the conversation, he asked, Have you found a decent restaurant around here yet? Not yet. There's a family-owned Roman place nearby. His face brightened in a way I'd never seen before. They make cacio e pepe exactly the way it should be, I laughed. You're serious? Completely. I lived on cacio e pepe when I studied in Florence. That caught his attention immediately. You studied in Italy? 1 semester. What were you studying? Translation. Worth it. It was the happiest few months of my life. The answer escaped before I could soften it. He seemed to notice. So, why not go back someday? I smiled sadly. Reality happened. He didn't interrupt. A daughter. Bills. A life that doesn't leave much room for impossible dreams. He considered that carefully. Dreams don't expire. I looked at him. They get postponed. Sometimes. But postponed isn't the same as dead. Something about the certainty in his voice made it difficult to breathe. He said things as though he expected the future to cooperate. I had forgotten what that sounded like. We stood in silence, he holding groceries, me holding junk mail, neither of us seeming particularly eager to leave. Eventually, he cleared his throat. I should get these upstairs before the frozen food melts. Probably. He started walking toward the elevators, then stopped halfway. Do you cook? I used to. What happened? I stopped having kitchens worth cooking in. He looked at me for a long second. Now you do. I laughed quietly. I still catch myself staring at the stove. As if it might disappear? Exactly. His smile widened just enough to be noticeable. If you're trying to recreate Florence, he lifted one grocery bag, start with simple ingredients. That's the secret? It's always been the secret. I might actually try. I'll ask Sophia to send you a list of places that import authentic Italian products. You'd do that? I take food seriously. So I've noticed. He nodded once. Italian bread. Proper olive oil. Pecorino. They matter. They really do. Neither of us moved again. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was unfamiliar. Eventually, he said quietly, "Good night." Good night. The elevator doors closed between us. Only after he disappeared did I realize my pulse had quickened over a conversation about pasta and bread. That should have been impossible. It wasn't attraction alone. It was something more dangerous. Recognition. For years, people had looked through me. Single father. Financial mess. Another exhausted man trying to stay afloat. Gabriel looked at me as though he saw the person underneath all of that, and I found myself doing something equally reckless, looking back. 2 weeks after moving into the apartment, I realized something strange. I hadn't checked the locks 3 times before going to bed. I hadn't peeked through the blinds every time footsteps echoed outside. The constant sense of danger had quietly loosened its grip. Healing doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it arrives disguised as ordinary mornings. Chloe loved her new school. Every afternoon she came home carrying another story. A science teacher who made volcanoes erupt in class. A librarian who remembered every student's favorite books. A girl named Maya who insisted they sit together at lunch every day. Watching Chloe become a normal teenager again felt almost miraculous. Work settled into an easy rhythm. 3 or 4 assignments every week. Contracts, shipping documents, business correspondence. Sophia somehow managed to make every email sound encouraging without ever becoming overly familiar. Friday mornings, my paycheck arrived exactly when promised. No delays, no excuses, no uncertainty. For the first time in years, my bank account wasn't something I feared opening. Life was becoming predictable. Except for Gabriel. He started appearing more often. On Tuesday, he inspected a radiator that had worked perfectly since the day we moved in. Wednesday, he wanted to verify the building's water pressure. Thursday, it was supposedly the weather seals around the windows. Every explanation sounded reasonable, individually. Together. Not so much. Each visit lasted 10 or 15 minutes. Always professional, always respectful. Yet I noticed things. How his shoulders relaxed after stepping inside. How his attention lingered on the apartment itself. The framed photos. The books Chloe left scattered across the coffee table. The signs that this place had become our home. And sometimes, when he thought I wasn't watching, I'd catch him looking at me, not staring, simply observing, as though making sure I was still there. Friday evening, Chloe cornered me while I was making dinner. She had inherited an unfortunate ability from her mother. She noticed everything. She leaned against the kitchen counter with her arms crossed. "Can I ask you something? That tone makes me nervous." "It should," I laughed. "Go ahead." She watched me stir the sauce for another few seconds. Then she asked, "Does Gabriel like you?" The wooden spoon stopped moving. "What?" "You heard me. He's my employer." "That's not what I asked." I sighed. "He's making sure we're settling in." She rolled her eyes with theatrical exaggeration. "Dad." "What?" "I asked if he likes you." I searched desperately for a safer answer. "It's complicated." She smiled. "That's adult language for yes." "No." "It's adult language for I don't know." I pointed the spoon at her. "When did you become so wise?" "When I started paying attention." I turned back to the stove. "What makes you think that?" Because he looks at you differently. I froze. Differently how? She shrugged. Like he's actually listening even when you're not talking. I swallowed. And? And you look at him the same way. There are moments when children accidentally tell the truth adults spend months trying to avoid. That was one of them. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't stop wondering whether she had seen something or simply said aloud what I had been trying very hard not to admit. I don't look at him like that. The words came out too quickly, too defensively. Chloe didn't argue. She simply leaned against the kitchen counter, folded her arms, and gave me one of those patient looks teenagers somehow master long before adulthood. Really? I mean it. She tilted her head. You started answering before I even finished asking. I opened my mouth, closed it again. She smiled, not because she'd won, but because she already knew the answer. It doesn't matter, I muttered. Even if, hypothetically, there were feelings, it wouldn't change anything. Why not? Because he's my boss, she waited. There are boundaries. There should be. I have responsibilities. I know. And whatever this is, I sighed. It's complicated. She laughed softly. Adults always say complicated when they don't want to admit they're scared. I rubbed a hand across my face. I'm not scared. You are. I'm being realistic. Same thing. The sauce simmered quietly between us. Finally, I admitted the truth. Yes. She looked up. I think he's an attractive man. There it is. But attraction isn't enough. He helped us. I know. I trust him more than I expected. I know. But I still don't know who he really is. That part lingered in the air. I've seen enough to realize his world isn't exactly ordinary, she nodded thoughtfully. I don't think he's dangerous. I don't think he'd hurt us. Then what's stopping you? My life. My past. The fact that every time I finally trusted someone, I paid for it. She walked over and rested one hand on my shoulder. You deserve something good eventually. I looked at her. When did you become wiser than me? She grinned. I had a decent teacher. Before I could answer, she stole the wooden spoon from my hand and started stirring the pasta herself. Just promise me one thing. What? Stop pretending you don't smile every time he knocks on the door. I wanted to deny it. Instead, I laughed, because she was right. Every time Gabriel's voice echoed through the hallway, something inside me reacted before my brain had a chance to intervene. Hope. That was the frightening part. I thought I'd buried that feeling years ago. Apparently not. A Saturday morning arrived with another knock, earlier than usual. When I opened the door, it took me a second to recognize him. No tailored suit, no polished dress shoes, dark jeans, grey sweater, running shoes. He suddenly looked less like a businessman and more like an ordinary man, which somehow made him even more dangerous. Good morning. Morning. Did I wake you? Only my dignity. He glanced at my old t-shirt and sweatpants. I've seen worse. I appreciate the lie. He smiled. May I come in? Of course. He stepped inside but remained standing. For once there was no clipboard, no maintenance checklist, no imaginary appliance waiting to be inspected. I wanted to talk to you about work. I blinked. Everything okay? Better than okay. He reached into his jacket and handed me a folder. We're expanding one of our product lines. Inside was a proposal, hundreds of pages, catalogs, marketing material, technical descriptions. This project will probably keep one translator busy for close to 3 months. I looked up. You want me to handle all of it? I wouldn't be asking otherwise. A smile spread across my face before I could stop it. I'd love to. I was hoping you'd say that. He hesitated. Rather than discuss everything here, he looked around the apartment. Would you join me for dinner Monday evening? I stared at him. Dinner? So we can go over the project. His expression remained perfectly calm, then one corner of his mouth lifted. And because I'm running out of believable excuses to inspect your apartment, I burst into laughter. So you admit the radiator didn't actually need inspecting? That one was admittedly weak. And the windows? I was improvising. I shook my head. I can't believe you. You don't have to. He held my gaze. But I'd still like to take you to dinner. There it was. No pretending, no hidden meanings, just an invitation. Every sensible instinct I possessed screamed that I should refuse. Keep things professional. Protect the fragile balance we'd built. Then Chloe's voice echoed in my memory. You deserve something good eventually. When? Monday. What time? I'll pick you up at 7. I nodded. Okay. His smile wasn't triumphant. It was relieved. There's one condition. What? The restaurant has a dress code. I'll see what I can do. I'm sure you will. A Sunday was torture, not because I doubted going, because I realized I had almost nothing suitable to wear. Years of surviving paycheck to paycheck hadn't exactly left room for nice clothes. Monday afternoon I emptied my closet anyway. 1 blazer, 2 decent shirts, a pair of dark slacks that still fit, and the navy suit I'd bought years earlier for a friend's wedding. It was slightly out of fashion, but it still looked respectable. Chloe walked into my room while I was staring at the mirror. You clean up pretty well. I feel ridiculous. You look confident. I feel like I'm pretending. Maybe confidence always starts that way. She straightened my tie without asking. Wear the black shoes. The brown ones are more comfortable. The black ones, I sighed. You're impossible. I'm usually right. Unfortunately, she was. At exactly 7 o'clock, Gabriel knocked. When I opened the door, he paused, for just a second. Then he smiled. You look incredible. Heat climbed into my face. So do you. His midnight blue suit fit him as though it had been tailored that afternoon. He glanced toward Chloe. I promise to return him before it gets too late. She grinned. I'll hold you to that. I grabbed my coat. I'll keep my phone on. I know. As we rode the elevator downstairs, neither of us spoke. Oddly, the silence wasn't awkward anymore. The restaurant overlooked the river. Soft lighting, white tablecloths, quiet conversations. The kind of place where everyone instinctively lowered their voices. The host greeted Gabriel by name. Apparently this wasn't his first visit. Our table sat near the windows, away from the rest of the dining room. You seem nervous, he observed after we sat. I don't belong in places like this. He folded his menu. Neither did I once. I don't believe that. You should. The waiter approached. Gabriel ordered the wine in flawless Italian, exchanging a few sentences that I only half understood. The ease with which he moved through the room made me painfully aware of how out of place I felt. When we were finally alone again, he leaned back. Relax. I'm trying. This isn't a business negotiation. No. The catalogue is real. He smiled. But it wasn't the only reason I invited you. I looked down at the tablecloth. I suspected that. I wanted to spend time with you somewhere that wasn't your apartment. Why? His answer came without hesitation. Because you're interesting. I laughed quietly. I'm a translator. You're also resilient. He rested his hands on the table. You rebuilt your life from almost nothing. You raised Chloe without losing your kindness. And you've earned every bit of my respect. No one had spoken to me that way before. Not in years. Dinner arrived before I could think of a response. Conversation drifted naturally after that. I told him stories about Florence, the tiny cafes hidden down narrow streets, the afternoons spent translating poetry instead of studying, the first time I tasted real gelato and realized I'd been lied to my entire life. He listened the way very few people do, without waiting for his turn to speak. Eventually I asked, "What about you? You grew up speaking Italian?" My mother insisted. He smiled faintly. She said language is how you carry your family with you. His expression dimmed. I lost her 4 years ago. I'm sorry. A drunk driver. The words landed heavily between us. It happened so fast. He stared into his wine. After that, I buried myself in work. It was easier than grieving. I nodded. I understand that. I built companies. I solved everyone's problems. I made myself indispensable. But I stopped letting anyone get close. He looked up. And then you and Chloe appeared. Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable, honest. He held my gaze for several long seconds. You reminded me that protecting people isn't the same as living. His voice lowered. And maybe, for the first time in years, I'd like to start living again. The question landed between us and refused to move. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The restaurant around us continued its quiet rhythm. Glasses clinking, low conversations, waiters moving between tables. But all of it felt distant. My attention was fixed entirely on Jessica. She sat across from me, her fingers wrapped around a cup she had stopped drinking from several minutes ago. What is it you really do, Gabriel? Her voice wasn't accusing. That somehow made it harder. The parts that don't involve wine imports, she added. The parts nobody explains. I studied her face. There was fear there, curiosity too, but more than anything, honesty. She deserved the same from me. You sure you want that answer? A faint smile touched her lips. I'm not sure about much these days, but if I'm considering letting you into my life, I think I need to know who I'm dealing with. The directness caught me off guard. Most people preferred lies. Jessica preferred reality, even when reality was ugly. I leaned back in my chair. I oversee certain operations throughout Manhattan. She waited. Businesses, territories, security arrangements, conflict management. One eyebrow lifted. That sounds like a very polished way to avoid saying something. I laughed quietly. Maybe. The smile disappeared from her face. Is it criminal? There it was. The question everybody eventually asked. I could have danced around it. Instead, I held her gaze. Parts of it exist in legal gray areas. Her shoulders stiffened. I continued before she could pull away. But I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. Some of what I do isn't clean. The silence that followed felt heavier than the one before. Finally, she said, So we're talking organized crime. I exhaled slowly. We're talking about neighborhoods where power always exists whether decent people want it to or not. She remained quiet. If I walk away, I said, someone else takes my place. Someone without limits. Someone without rules. Everyone says they have rules. Not everyone actually follows them. For a long moment, she simply looked at me, trying to decide whether I was dangerous, trying to decide whether I was lying, trying to decide whether the difference even mattered. The wine company is real? Yes. The properties? Yes. The jobs? All legitimate. I watched her absorb every word. The strange thing was that I wasn't worried about her judgment. I was worried about losing her. That realization unsettled me more than any threat ever had. She looked down at the table, then back at me. Do you want me to know everything? The answer came immediately. No. She blinked. Apparently she hadn't expected that. Why not? Because if she saw every dark corner of my world, she'd run. Because she'd never sleep peacefully again. Because I wanted one thing in my life untouched by blood and fear. But I couldn't say any of that. Instead, I said, because some things should stay away from you. Her expression softened, unexpectedly. Good. I frowned. Good? I don't need details. Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. Jessica shook her head. I see what's in front of me, Gabriel. I stayed silent. You helped Chloe when you didn't have to. I felt something tighten in my chest. You gave us safety, she continued. You gave me work when nobody else would. The intensity in her eyes made it impossible to look away. I know what kind of man you've been to us. The words landed harder than she realized. I'll judge that, she said quietly. Not rumors, not assumptions. Something dangerous stirred inside me. Hope. The most reckless emotion of all. You're surprisingly practical. A small laugh escaped her. No, she shook her head. I'm a single mother who spent 3 years trying to survive. There was pain behind those words, exhaustion, scars that still hadn't healed. People call that practicality. She smiled sadly. I call it necessity. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I reached across the table, not touching her, just close enough to feel the warmth of her hand. I think you're stronger than you realize. Her breathing changed, just slightly, enough for me to notice, enough for me to remember. And suddenly I understood why I kept finding reasons to knock on her door, why I searched for excuses to see her, why every room felt different when she entered it. The realization was terrifying, because it wasn't attraction anymore. It was becoming something else, something far more dangerous. Jessica swallowed. Maybe we should leave. Probably. Instead, I paid the bill and walked her home. The November air cut through the city streets, cold enough to make our breath visible. Neither of us talked much. We didn't need to. The silence felt intimate rather than uncomfortable. Every accidental brush of her arm against mine sent electricity through me. By the time we reached her building, my self-control was hanging by a thread. She stopped beneath a street lamp. The golden light softened her features. Thank you for tonight. Any time. No, she said softly. Not just dinner. I waited. For being honest. The words caught me off guard. Most people thanked me for money, for favors, for protection. Nobody ever thanked me for honesty. I've spent years running, she admitted. The vulnerability in her voice nearly broke me. From mistakes, from fear, from everything. Her eyes met mine. Maybe I'm tired of running. The city seemed to disappear. The traffic, the noise, the people, all gone. There was only her, only this moment. I lifted my hand slowly, giving her every chance to stop me. She didn't. My thumb brushed gently against her cheek. A tiny eyelash clung to her skin. Make a wish, I said. Her eyes closed. For one beautiful second, she looked completely at peace. When she opened them again, I realized how little space existed between us. A few inches, maybe less. Close enough to kiss her. Close enough to forget every promise I'd made myself. I saw the same temptation in her eyes, the same struggle, the same impossible pull. My heart pounded. One move. That's all it would take. One move and everything would change. Instead, she stepped back. Not far. Just enough. A boundary. A request. I can't. The disappointment hit immediately. But it wasn't anger. Never anger. Not yet, she whispered. I nodded. I understand. And I did. More than she knew. She'd spent years surviving. Trust wasn't something you handed over in a single night. It feels too fast. Then we'll slow down. She looked surprised. Just like that? Just like that. A faint smile appeared. You're being very patient. I shook my head. I'm being selfish. Her eyebrows rose. How is that selfish? Because I want this to be your choice. I held her gaze. Not something you're pressured into. For a moment emotion flashed across her face. Raw, unprotected, beautiful. What if I'm never ready? The question hung between us. I answered honestly. Then nothing changes. Her eyes widened. I mean it. I stepped back, giving her room. If all I ever get is what we already have, that's enough. It wasn't enough. Not even close. But I'd take it. I'd take whatever she was willing to give, because losing her entirely was the one outcome I couldn't accept. I opened the building door. Good night, Jessica. She smiled, the kind that stayed with a man long after she was gone. Good night, Gabriel. I watched her disappear inside, and for the first time in years, I found myself standing alone on a sidewalk with absolutely no desire to leave. The following week became an exercise in restraint. I kept my promise. No surprise visits. No invented maintenance issues. No excuses to knock on her door. But distance didn't help. If anything, it made things worse. Every glimpse of her in the lobby felt loaded with things neither of us was ready to say. Every shared look lasted a second too long. Meanwhile, Sophia expanded Jessica's responsibilities within the company. The promotion came with a substantial raise. For most people, it wouldn't have meant much. For Jessica, it meant breathing again. I could see the difference. The constant tension around her shoulders began disappearing. The worry in her eyes softened. For the first time since I'd met her, she wasn't living one disaster away from collapse. And seeing that gave me a strange sense of satisfaction. Not because I'd provided it, because she'd finally earned the chance to feel safe. What I didn't expect was how quickly Chloe started becoming a bigger part of my life. And that changed everything. Keeping my distance from Jessica was difficult. Keeping my distance from Chloe wasn't. Not because I wanted to avoid her. Because there was no reason to. Jessica had drawn a clear boundary, and I respected it completely. I stopped inventing excuses to visit their apartment, stopped interrupting quiet evenings with fake maintenance concerns or casual conversations in the hallway. But the building had its own rhythm. People crossed paths naturally. The lobby, the mailroom, the elevator, the courtyard. Those places belonged to everyone, including Chloe. The first time we actually talked, she had just come back from school carrying a backpack that looked far heavier than any teenager should have been carrying. "Long day?" I asked. She looked surprised to see me. "A little." "What subject is wearing you out?" She laughed. "Geometry." I would have guessed history. She tilted her head. "Why?" "You look like someone who asks too many questions to enjoy memorizing dates." She grinned. "That's surprisingly accurate." That was all. A 2-minute conversation before she headed upstairs. I thought nothing of it. Apparently she did. A day later, I noticed a sketchbook tucked beneath her arm while she waited for the elevator. When she realized I'd noticed it, she instinctively tried to hide it. "You draw? A little?" "I doubt it's only a little." She hesitated. Then she handed it to me. I expected random doodles. Instead, I found detailed pencil sketches of buildings, churches, bridges, apartment facades. Even our own building had been carefully recreated across 2 pages. The perspective was remarkably good. "You've got an eye." Her cheeks turned pink. "I just like buildings." "No." I handed the notebook back. "You understand them." She frowned. "There's a difference." I nodded. "People who like architecture admire it." I tapped one of the sketches. "People who understand it see how every line supports another." She stared at me. "You really think so?" "I know so." The next afternoon, I stopped by an independent bookstore on my way back from a meeting. An hour later, I found myself knocking lightly on the lobby table where she was finishing homework. I saw this. I placed a hardcover book beside her. It was filled with architectural sketches from cities around the world. "You don't have to." "I wanted to." She slowly opened the first page. Her eyes lit up immediately. The reaction alone made the purchase worthwhile. By Friday, she had apparently decided I wasn't nearly as intimidating as I'd first seemed. When I found her after school that afternoon, she launched into conversation before I even had the chance to say hello. "I'm looking at architecture schools." "Already?" "I'm trying." She sounded embarrassed. "I don't even know if it's realistic." "It becomes realistic the moment you start preparing." She looked thoughtful. "I've been reading about Columbia." I smiled. "I know a few people there." Her eyebrows shot upward. "You do?" "I've worked with alumni on restoration projects." She stared. Would it be weird if I asked questions someday?" "Not at all." "I could arrange for you to speak with someone from the department." She blinked several times. "You'd really do that?" "If it's something you care about." Her smile was genuine, not exaggerated, not polite. Just genuine. It reminded me painfully of how young she still was, despite everything life had forced her to become. That evening, I found myself wondering what Jessica would think. Would she assume I was trying to earn Chloe's approval? The thought bothered me, because it wasn't true. Children always knew when adults treated them like obstacles. Chloe wasn't an obstacle. She was simply Chloe, intelligent, observant, far older emotionally than any 15-year-old should have been. A few days later, Jessica answered that question herself. She invited me inside, not with uncertainty, not reluctantly, simply because she'd chosen to. When she opened the door, I noticed 2 paper coffee cups already in my hands. I almost laughed. I was hoping this might qualify as a peace offering. She looked at the cups. For what? For giving you space instead of talking. A faint smile crossed her face. I think the space helped. I hoped it would. She stepped aside. Come in. I entered slowly, careful not to assume anything had changed. The apartment felt different, comfortable, lived in, warmer than before. Chloe's at a friend's house, Jessica said, so this time we don't need to pretend we're discussing radiator inspections. I couldn't help laughing. I think we've officially run out of maintenance excuses. She gestured toward the couch. We deliberately sat with almost an entire cushion separating us. The coffee rested on the table between us like an invisible agreement that neither of us would rush anything. For a while we talked about ordinary things, the neighborhood, restaurants nearby, the unusually warm autumn, simple conversations, safe conversations. Then she surprised me. You never asked what Italy was like. I turned toward her. I wanted to. So why didn't you? Because I wanted the answer when you were ready to tell it. Something softened in her expression. She looked out the window before speaking. When I lived in Florence, the way she said those words told me she wasn't remembering a place. She was remembering a version of herself. She described wandering quiet streets before sunrise, while the city still belonged to locals. She talked about losing entire afternoons inside museums, standing inches away from Renaissance paintings until she could almost see the decisions each artist had made with every brushstroke. She spoke about long dinners where conversation mattered more than the food itself, about families who refused to rush meals because sharing time around a table was considered sacred. As she talked, she stopped looking tired, stopped looking cautious. For 20 minutes she became someone else, someone whose dreams had once stretched much farther than survival. Why didn't you stay? I asked gently. Her smile faded. Reality, she shrugged. My visa expired. My savings disappeared. And there were responsibilities waiting for me back home. She looked down at her cup. I convinced myself that practicality mattered more than passion. She laughed quietly. I'm not sure I won that argument. I think you're winning it now. She looked confused. You've built something valuable. She immediately shook her head. You built it. No, I interrupted. I opened a door. I leaned forward slightly. You walked through it. She stayed silent. Our European partners requested you by name. Her eyes widened. Sophia told you? They specifically asked that you continue handling their correspondence. For a second she couldn't speak. I recognized that look. It wasn't pride, it was relief. The kind that comes when someone finally believes they earned what they have. The conversation drifted naturally after that. She asked about my childhood, about my mother. I found myself telling stories I hadn't repeated in years. How she'd dragged me through museums across Italy, how she'd insist I sketch paintings instead of simply looking at them. She wanted me to become an architect, I admitted, or a painter. Jessica smiled. I can see that. I disappointed her. I don't believe that. I chose business. You chose responsibility. Her correction surprised me. I looked at her. She continued quietly. Those aren't always the same thing. For a moment, I saw my mother reflected in Jessica's expression, not physically, emotionally. The same ability to see beyond what people admitted out loud. If you could start over, she asked, would you choose differently? The answer required no thought. No. She looked surprised. What I built protects a lot of people. I didn't elaborate, I couldn't. It isn't beautiful, but it's necessary. She nodded slowly. I believe you. Then I decided it was my turn. What about you? What about me? That master's degree. She froze. You mentioned literary translation once. Her eyes drifted toward the floor. That was a long time ago. So? I have responsibilities. You also have stability now. She frowned. I still have Chloe. You have housing. You have a steady income. You have experience. I smiled. So tell me what the real obstacle is. She didn't answer immediately. When she finally did, her voice was almost a whisper. I'm afraid. Of failing? She shook her head. I'm afraid of discovering I still want it. The honesty hit me harder than anything she'd said all afternoon, because I knew exactly what it felt like. Sometimes the greatest fear isn't losing a dream. It's realizing it never stopped living inside you. I never expected something as simple as holding someone's hand to shake me the way it did. Jessica had been talking about her future, though it sounded more like she was asking permission to imagine one. Every possibility she mentioned came wrapped in hesitation, as if happiness belonged to other people. I don't even know why I keep looking, she admitted quietly. It's probably unrealistic. I turned toward her, noticing the exhaustion behind her eyes. She had spent so many years surviving that she no longer recognized the difference between fear and practicality. Maybe you're looking because a part of you still believes you deserve more. She laughed once, but there wasn't much humor in it. I stopped believing that a long time ago. Without thinking, I rested my hand over hers. She didn't pull away. Then borrow my belief until yours comes back. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was fragile, honest. Her fingers slowly curled around mine. You really think I could start over? I think you've already started. You just haven't realized it yet. For the first time since I'd met her, I saw hope replace doubt, if only for a second. Then she surprised me. So, would you come over for dinner next week? I smiled. Is that an invitation? Italian food, she said, suddenly embarrassed. I learned a few things years ago. I'd like to see if I still remember. I wouldn't miss it. She hesitated. Chloe will be there. Good, I answered immediately. I'd like that. The relief on her face told me she'd been afraid my answer would be different. The following week, everything about Friday felt strangely important. Jessica had transformed her apartment. It wasn't because of decorations or candles. It was because she had cooked with the kind of care people only give to memories they refuse to lose. The smell greeted me before she even opened the door. Fresh pepper, aged cheese, warm pasta. You actually made it from scratch, I asked. She shrugged. I wanted to remember who I used to be. You remembered. Chloe laughed from the dining table. I've been hearing about this pasta for 2 days. Dinner turned into something neither forced nor formal. Chloe spoke about architecture with the excitement only teenagers possess when someone genuinely listens. I asked questions because I actually wanted the answers, and watching her confidence grow with every sentence felt unexpectedly rewarding. Jessica barely spoke during those moments. She simply watched. More than once I caught her smiling to herself. When Chloe excused herself, claiming homework, the timing felt almost suspicious. Jessica rolled her eyes. I think she's giving us space. She's smarter than both of us. I know. We cleaned the kitchen together without discussing who should do what. It felt domestic, comfortable, dangerously comfortable. Eventually we settled onto the couch with glasses of wine. The apartment had become so quiet that I could hear the clock in the hallway. She stared into her glass for a long moment. What exactly are we doing, Gabriel? There it was, the question we'd both been avoiding. I set my wine down before answering. I know what I want. She looked at me carefully. And what's that? You. She blinked. I don't mean tonight. I don't mean something temporary. I leaned back, trying to find words worthy of the truth. I want to know the version of you that laughs without apologizing. I want to know what your mornings look like, what books you leave unfinished, what scares you at 3 a.m. She said nothing. I want the ordinary days. Those are the ones that matter. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. You're making this sound easy. No. I smiled softly. I'm saying you're worth the difficult parts. She stared at me long enough that I almost wondered if I'd said too much. Then she asked something that caught me completely off guard. "When you look at me," she swallowed, "what do you actually see?" I answered before fear could edit the truth. "Someone who's forgotten how extraordinary she is." The distance between us disappeared naturally. No dramatic moment, no conscious decision. 1 second we were talking. The next, our foreheads touched. Our first kiss wasn't desperate, it was careful, almost reverent, like two people learning a language neither had spoken in years. When we finally separated, neither of us moved very far. I laughed quietly. "I should probably go." "You probably should." Neither of us stood. Instead, we spent hours talking about everything we'd never admitted before. Childhood memories, favorite cities, the dreams we'd abandoned, the mistakes we still carried. Every now and then she'd reach for my hand, almost absent-mindedly, just to make sure I was still there. By the time I finally walked toward the elevator, midnight had come and gone. When the doors closed, I could still see her standing in the hallway, smiling. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm neither of us planned. Some nights Chloe joined us for dinner, filling the apartment with stories from school and impossible design ideas. Other evenings she stayed with friends, leaving Jessica and me alone. Those nights carried more temptation, long kisses, lazy conversations stretched across the couch, hands wandering just enough to remind us how badly we wanted each other. Yet every boundary Jessica drew became one I refused to cross. Not because I lacked desire, because trust mattered more. Every time I left, instead of staying the night, I saw gratitude hidden behind the disappointment in her eyes. She needed someone who respected not yet. I intended to be that man. Then the past came looking for her. It was close to 11 at night. I had just started reading when my phone rang. Jessica. The moment I answered, I heard it. Banging, shouting, a man's voice, her breathing. "Gabriel." She sounded terrified. "Ryan's outside." Every muscle in my body tightened. "What happened?" "He's pounding on the door." Another violent crash echoed through the phone. "Jessica, I think he's drunk." His voice exploded again. "I know you're in there." My heartbeat accelerated. "Listen to me carefully." "I'm listening." "Lock every door." "They're locked." "Where's Chloe?" "In her room." "Keep her there." "I will. I'm coming." "You don't have to." "I already am." I was grabbing my keys before she finished speaking. By the time the elevator doors closed behind me, I wasn't thinking about consequences. I was thinking about getting there before Ryan did something neither Jessica nor Chloe would ever forget. I had barely thrown on my jacket before I was in the elevator, listening to Jessica's breathing through my phone. She wasn't saying much anymore. She didn't have to. The crashing sounds outside her apartment told me everything I needed to know. By the time I stepped onto her floor, Ryan's voice echoed down the hallway. "After everything I gave you." The lie almost made me laugh. Instead, I walked toward him without rushing. "Step away from that door." He spun around, surprised to see someone interrupting his performance. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" I stopped several feet away. "The man telling you this conversation is over." His drunken confidence faltered for a split second before returning. "This has nothing to do with you. It became my business the moment you frightened them." He looked past me, searching for uncertainty. He found none. The two security men who had arrived with me remained silent behind us. They didn't threaten him with words. Their presence was enough. Ryan finally noticed them. His shoulders stiffened. "What is this?" "A choice." I reached into my coat and removed a sealed envelope. "You walk away tonight. Sign the paperwork my attorney prepares. Surrender every legal claim you still pretend to have over Chloe, and you never contact Jessica again." He stared at the envelope. "And if I don't?" "Then we solve this another way." The hallway became unnaturally quiet. Even Ryan seemed to realize this wasn't a bluff. He tried one last protest. "I'm her father." "No," I answered calmly. "A father shows up." His jaw tightened. "You disappeared." He looked toward Jessica's apartment door. "I still have rights. You abandoned those years ago." I held the envelope a little higher. This money is enough to convince you that starting over somewhere else is smarter than continuing this conversation. His eyes followed it immediately. Some people reveal themselves in moments like that, not through anger, through greed. How much? Enough. He hesitated. I gave him exactly 10 seconds. When they passed, I lowered my hand. The offer expires now. Wait! His voice cracked with desperation. I'll sign. I figured. He reached for the envelope almost eagerly. My attorney will contact you tomorrow, I said. You'll receive every cent after the documents are notarized. He nodded repeatedly. Then I stepped closer, close enough that only he could hear me. If Jessica or Chloe ever hear your voice again... I let the sentence hang unfinished. Sometimes imagination creates consequences far worse than words. Ryan swallowed. I understand. I hope so. Without another argument, he hurried toward the stairwell instead of waiting for the elevator. He never looked back. Only after the heavy stairwell door slammed shut did I finally exhale. The apartment door opened slowly. Jessica stood there, pale but steady. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "Is it over?" I nodded. Yes. Behind her, Chloe peeked around the hallway corner. Her eyes were still red from crying. He's gone? I crouched slightly so I wasn't towering over her. He's gone. She studied my face as if searching for any hint that I wasn't telling the truth. Finally, she ran toward me. The force of the hug nearly knocked me backward. I wrapped one arm around her shoulders, gently brushing her hair away from her face. It's okay, I murmured. You're safe. She cried into my jacket for several minutes. Over her shoulder, Jessica looked at me with tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed while Ryan had been outside. There was gratitude there, but there was something else too. Trust, the kind that isn't requested, only earned. Sarikubitas. After that night, pretending there was distance between Jessica and me became impossible. Fear has a strange way of rearranging priorities. The invisible line we'd spent months respecting slowly disappeared. I never officially moved into their apartment. Still, pieces of me quietly settled there. A spare blazer hung beside Jessica's coats. My favorite coffee somehow kept appearing in her kitchen cabinet. Even my reading glasses eventually found a permanent home on the bookshelf because I kept forgetting to take them back upstairs. No one announced the change. It simply happened. 3 or 4 nights every week I found myself sitting at their dinner table. Sometimes I brought food from one of my restaurants. Other nights Jessica insisted on cooking. Those became my favorites, not because of the meals, because of the conversations. Chloe talked endlessly while finishing homework. Jessica laughed more often, real laughter. Not the polite version she'd worn like armor when we'd first met. Watching both of them heal felt strangely addictive. For the first time in years, going home no longer meant returning to my penthouse. It meant walking across the hallway. Jessica eventually began asking questions she'd carefully avoided before. Not about my past, about my businesses. What actually keeps everything running? She asked one evening while drying dishes. I know there's more than one company. There is. I leaned against the counter. The import business is legitimate. I assumed it was. It supplies restaurants across several states. She looked genuinely interested. And the restaurants? Profitable. You own the buildings too. Most of them. She laughed softly. So you're secretly a real businessman. I've never been secretive about that part. Over the following weeks, I explained everything I could explain. Warehouses, distribution routes, real estate, payroll, investments, legal ventures that would continue thriving whether I worked another day or not. She listened carefully. Then came the question I had expected from the beginning. If everything legal is successful, she paused, why not leave everything else behind? I didn't answer immediately, because I honestly didn't know. My world taught me that loyalty is earned through sacrifice. She waited. It also taught me that violence solves problems quickly. And now? I looked toward the living room where Chloe was laughing at something on television. Now I'm wondering whether I've confused survival with living. Jessica didn't answer. She simply slipped her hand into mine beneath the kitchen counter. No speech, no advice. Just quiet understanding. Sometimes that was enough. That nearly a month after Ryan vanished from our lives, I decided it was time. There's someone I want you to meet. Jessica looked up from her coffee. Should I be worried? I smiled. Only if you plan on making a bad first impression. She narrowed her eyes. Who is it? The oldest friend I have. My lawyer? No. My mentor. What does he know about me? Enough to be curious. That evening we drove to my oldest restaurant in Little Italy. Unlike the newer locations, this one still felt untouched by trends. Brick walls, soft lighting, the smell of garlic, fresh bread, and simmering tomato sauce lingering in the air. Nearly every employee greeted me by name. Jessica noticed. You built something real here. I tried. Anthony was already waiting in a private dining room when we arrived. Silver hair, sharp eyes, the kind of man who observed before speaking. He stood and offered Jessica a warm handshake. So, he said with an amused smile, you're the woman who's managed to accomplish something none of us thought possible. Jessica blinked. And what exactly is that? Anthony glanced at me. You've convinced this stubborn man that a peaceful life might actually be worth fighting for. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had embarrassed me. Jessica smiled. Then, for reasons I couldn't entirely explain, so did I. The conversation that stayed with me the most that night wasn't the one I had with her. It was the one I had with Anthony. Emily had stepped away for a moment, following Chloe toward the dessert table, while Gabriel excused himself to answer a phone call. For the first time all evening, the noise around us seemed distant. Anthony leaned back in his chair, studying me with the kind of expression only someone who had watched my life unfold for years could wear. You know, he said quietly, I've almost forgotten what you looked like when you smiled without forcing it. I let out a dry laugh. I smile. Not like this. His words landed harder than I expected. He folded his hands together before continuing. After Isabella died, you disappeared. I looked down at the untouched glass in front of me. No one spoke her name very often, not because they forgot her, because they remembered too well. For years, Anthony continued, your office became your entire life. You stopped sleeping. You handled problems that 10 other people could have solved because you couldn't stand being alone with your own thoughts. I didn't answer. There wasn't anything to deny. He looked toward the hallway where Emily had disappeared. Then she walked into your life. I followed his gaze. I've watched you hand off responsibilities you would have never trusted anyone else with. I've watched you leave work before midnight. I've watched you laugh. He smiled. She didn't save your business. He shook his head. She saved you. The words stayed with me long after Gabriel returned to the table. Later that evening, I drove Emily back to my penthouse. She had never been there before. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped inside slowly, taking in every detail without saying a word. The apartment wasn't designed to impress people. It had never needed to. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan, shelves filled with books I'd actually read, paintings I had collected because they meant something, not because they were expensive. It was the only place where I didn't have to play a role. She walked toward the glass, staring at the light stretching across the city. So, she said softly, this is where you disappear every night. I joined her. This is where I come when I don't want the world looking at me. She turned. Why bring me here now? Because I was tired of compartments, tired of pretending she belonged in one part of my life while the rest remained locked away. I wanted you to see the version of me that nobody else does. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was honest. Then she reached for my hand. I love you. No hesitation, no dramatic build-up, just 4 words spoken with complete certainty. I know life is complicated, she whispered. I know neither of us planned any of this, but somewhere along the way you and Chloe became my family. My chest tightened. I had negotiated billion-dollar deals without feeling nervous. Those words nearly stole my voice. I love you too. It was the simplest truth I'd spoken in years. That night we held each other as the city glowed outside the windows, allowing months of guarded emotions to finally fall away. For the first time since losing Isabella, I wasn't haunted by the fear that happiness would vanish the moment I reached for it. When morning came, Emily was still beside me. For once, I didn't wake up alone. The next afternoon, Chloe cornered her mother in the living room, while I pretended to be interested in paperwork across the apartment. Teenagers notice everything, especially the things adults think they're hiding. "So," Chloe said with a grin. "You two finally admitted it?" Emily blinked. "It was that obvious?" Chloe laughed. "Mom, it was obvious weeks ago." The humor slowly faded from Emily's face. "I'm happy," she admitted. "But I'm scared." "Of what?" "That this disappears." She looked down. "I've finally built something stable, a home, a future. I'm terrified of losing it." Chloe didn't answer immediately. Instead, she sat beside her. "Gabriel isn't Dad." Emily looked up. "Dad ran away when life got difficult." She smiled gently. "Gabriel runs toward difficult things." There was a long silence. "And," Chloe shrugged, "he looks at you like you're the best thing that's ever happened to him." She laughed. "He treats me like I actually matter too." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I think we're safe," Chloe whispered. "I really do." Listening from the other room, I realized I had never wanted to deserve someone's trust more than I did in that moment. Life settled into a rhythm neither of us expected. Emily's responsibilities within the company expanded quickly. She wasn't simply translating documents anymore. She coordinated international communications, managed relationships with overseas partners, reviewed contracts before they reached my desk, and solved problems before anyone else even noticed they existed. Watching her grow into the role became one of my favorite parts of every day. When Sophia proposed increasing her salary and hiring an assistant beneath her, I approved it before the meeting was even over. Emily had earned every opportunity. She still acted surprised every time another door opened. She had spent so many years surviving that success felt unfamiliar. One evening while we were eating dinner together, I asked the question I'd been waiting months to bring up again. "Have you looked at graduate programs?" She sighed. "I have. And Columbia has exactly what I want." She smiled sadly. "I just can't justify the cost." "I can." Her fork stopped halfway to the plate. "No. It's not charity." "It feels like it." I leaned forward. "My international division is growing faster than anyone predicted." I smiled. "I need someone with advanced qualifications." She narrowed her eyes. "That's your business argument?" "It's the truth." "And if I insist on paying you back?" I shrugged. "Then call it a loan." She stared at me for several seconds before shaking her head with a reluctant smile. "You always find a way to win." "No." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I just refuse to let pride steal your future." Eventually she nodded. Neither of us mentioned repayment again. Some promises exist only to protect someone's dignity, and sometimes love looks exactly like that.